Why would the Capitol give people hope just to rip it away? Oh wait, that's the whole point. Changing the rules so that there could be 2 victors for the 74th Hunger Games had never been done before. Then, of course, was the revoking of the 2 victor rule change. How did this all come to be, and what was the initial game maker plan before Katniss and Peeta threw their Nightlock berry wrench into it? This is based on book canon, though I will get into some movie stuff. There will be some Sunrise on the Reaping spoilers later on. I will give you a warning so you can run away if you need to. Let's dive in. I'll start with the creation of this rule change. In the book, the 2 victor rule is announced the day after Rue died. It happens at night after the anthem plays and the sky shows that there was no new death. Then Claudius Templesmith's voice booms down from overhead, congratulating the 6 of us who remain. Katniss thinks he's about to announce a feast, but instead, he's saying something very confusing. There's been a rule change in the games. Under the new rule, both tributes from the same district will be declared winners if they are the last 2 alive. Having a rule change in the Hunger Games is unheard of, especially since there's barely any formal rules to begin with, except for the one where you can't step off your circle early because you'll blow up, and the unspoken rule about not eating one another. Ew. There's also the other unspoken rule of not doing anything rebellious, like destroying the force field around the arena, for example. Once Katniss processes this crazy rule change, she can't help but call out Peeta's name, and Katniss does some great mental gymnastics over why she did this. The biggest reason is because she cares about Peeta, duh, but instead she rationalizes she has to ally with him now because she'd be a pariah back home if she didn't, and since they're the star-crossed lovers from District 12, it's an absolute requirement if she wants any more help from sympathetic sponsors. Plus, it just makes sense to protect each other. Katniss rationalizes that the reason for this unprecedented rule change is because Peeta had been playing the star-crossed lover angle, and their romance must be so popular with the audience that condemning it would jeopardize the success of the games. And Peeta must have convinced the audience that he'd been trying to keep her alive this whole time. So that's her interpretation of the rule change, but I think it's a lot bigger than that. Game makers are always trying to make the most entertaining and impactful games possible. They've been making up new types of mutts, deadly obstacles, and contestant narratives for decades, and probably have a whole vault of evil plans for the future. I think of it as a reality game show, like Survivor. They write up different challenges, twists, and especially character arcs to manipulate, like how to maximize the drama out of an underdog versus alpha, or get 2 best friends to turn against each other, or create the opportunity for a juicy romance. Producers pull the strings just like game makers. If they want certain contestants to stay in the competition because they're making entertaining TV, they can manipulate the game to keep them around and get rid of a contestant who no longer adds to the show. The Hunger Games are just an evil authoritarian regime's version of a reality competition show. With all that in mind, here's my theory of what went down behind the scenes with the game makers. I believe the concept of a 2 victor game was something they had already come up with. It was just sitting unused in the vault until a good opportunity to use it presented itself. I believe this plan was always to announce that there could be 2 victors, and then at the very end they would revoke the rules so they could get these 2 allies to turn on each other for an epic ending. Or one of them could play the hero, dramatically sacrificing themselves so the other could win. That's what Peeta tried to do. He told Katniss to shoot him, and when she wouldn't, he ripped off the bandage on his leg wound to purposely bleed out. That's my lover boy. I believe that's what the game makers thought would happen with Katniss and Peeta. There's plenty of variables and ways for a 2 victor game to play out. There is the risk of the tributes rebelling by refusing to fight or make that self-sacrifice. I think that's the worst case scenario they had prepared for. If that happened, they would just release some more mutts or cause an unnatural disaster like a huge earthquake that would wipe out one of them. Not ideal, but not as disastrous as both tributes threatening to send themselves to their graves. The fact that the game makers and Snow didn't think this was a possibility is a testament to their arrogance and hubris for how much control they think they have over the districts. They viewed these kids as animals whose biggest goal was survival, that they felt so afraid and powerless against the Capitol that they wouldn't even think of rebelling. They were wrong. The requirement of the victors being from the same district isn't even necessary for this to work. Say 2 tributes from different districts formed an alliance, got really close, and became crowd favorites, like Rue and Katniss. Game makers could announce that this year 2 tributes could win, period, no matter which district they're from. Other remaining tributes would form duo alliances as a response to this rule change. change. If one of these duos ended up as the final two, they announce that there can be only one victor and they turn on each other. How fun, right? Or say the last two standing weren't from the same alliance. There's that moment of relief the tributes get even though they were enemies when it's down to just them two, and in a flash, it's stripped away by revoking the rule and there's a typical final showdown. Give them hope and then strip it away. It entertains the capital and demoralizes the districts to keep them controlled. Having that requirement that the two victors are from the same district works for things besides a romance too. They could be close allies, like I said earlier, or even family members. They could be cousins or more dramatically, siblings. This could be planned from the reaping. Just rig it so a brother and sister go in together. Or maybe some twisted career siblings volunteer together. Still has the same possibilities for the end to play out as that ally example. Game makers can only do a two victor bait and switch in one game, like ever. Once they do this twist, it wouldn't work a second time since tributes would be expecting it. Or they'd have to wait another 100 years or something for a new generation. The game makers needed to save this play for the best possible scenario. Enter the star-crossed lovers from District 12. Katniss was an exciting contestant from the beginning since she volunteered for Prim. Volunteering in a non-career district was super rare. Then she and Peeta had the most buzzworthy outfits in the chariot parade, and they held hands in a rare display of unity. I'll revisit Cinna and all that later, don't worry. Katniss's training score of 11 made her even more intriguing since that's an unusually high score, period, and it was the highest of all the tributes. Peeta got a respectable 8, but what made him fully break into the spotlight was his interview love bomb, which I talked about in another video. That cemented them as a pair people wanted to see more of. I think all of that put the two victor play on the game board to possibly be used, and the game makers would decide whether or not to put it in motion depending on how the games went. It probably wasn't seen by game makers as something super likely to get approved to do in the first place since it's so extreme. I assume Snow had ultimate authority on this, and he granted it to head game maker Seneca Crane. During the games, Peeta kept the star-crossed lover narrative alive and unintentionally set the perfect stage for the game makers to do the two victor play. Thank you, Peeta! Snaps! I'm bad at snapping. His altruistic, rebellious plan to sacrifice himself to help Katniss win paid off big time. They both survived and jump-started the rebellion! Let's look at the timing of the two victor announcement. There's only 6 tributes left. Katniss is newly allyless. Rue had died. Peeta is dying in the mud. There's Cato and Chloe from District 2 trucking along, and the partnerless tributes Foxface from 5 and Thresh from 11. The game makers want Katniss to go and find Peeta, likely expecting to get a tragic love story that ultimately ends with Peeta dying in Katniss's arms. And they got in some great drama by announcing the feast with Peeta's life-saving medicine. Katniss saying she's gonna go get the medicine, Peeta asking her not to, then she drugs him so he passes out, and then she risks it all to go get this medicine for him and saves him. Then the game makers gave them rainy days to keep them in their cave to amp up the romance. All this cozy time together. Cato and Chloe were the only other team that could supposedly win together before they announced the twist. I know there's some people who are really into Cato and Chloe and ship it and all that. I'm not one of those people, to be honest. In the book, they're allies. They seem to care about each other in that way. If they had a romance, it was never mentioned. They seemed to trust each other. Chloe was calling for Cato's help when Thresh was about to kill her, and Cato was calling her name back, but he just didn't get there in time. I've also seen the theory that the Capitol wanted Cato and Chloe to win, and they wouldn't have revoked the two victor rule if they had been the final two. But I don't think that's likely. As I said earlier, I believe the two victor plan always included it being revoked for an epic ending to the games. I'm pretty confident that Snow would never have agreed to this play if it didn't include the rule revokement, if it was even necessary, since the games could have ended with the final two not even being from the same district anyway. Snow would not want two victors in a game. That would make everyone just want there to be two victors the next year and the next year. It's not good for the capital regime. Even though 2 is a career district, Snow would not reward them with two victors. He probably had a lot of disdain for 2 since that's where Sejanus and his family was from. Yes, the Plinths made Snow the heir to their fortune and treated him like a son, but Snow was using them. He condemned their son to death and then bled his parents dry, believing he deserved their money anyway, since they were district and he's capital. Snow is trash. Hot trash, but trash. Reminder, Seneca Crane isn't even mentioned by name until Catching Fire, when Snow alludes to his execution after showing up at Katniss's house. The term head game maker isn't even in the first book. I honestly forgot about all that since Seneca was such a big part of the movie. That said, for the book canon, there's a lot of room for speculation about the whole ordeal and what Seneca was like. The books don't even say how long he'd been head game maker for. The movies say it's his 3rd year as one, but anyways, he was the one who took the blame for the two victor play going south. I think the knowledge of the two victor play was limited to game makers and important capital officials. I think the only way Haymitch could have known about about this before it was implemented would be if an undercover capital rebel had told him so, most likely Plutarch, but it doesn't sound like Haymitch knew this was a possibility, or if he did, it was very soon before it was announced. In Catching Fire, he said to Katniss, "Until they changed the rules, I could only hope to get one of you out of there alive. I thought since he," meaning Peeta, "was determined to protect you, well, between the three of us, we might be able to bring you home." This was after the disastrous victory tour speech in District 11 when they were all talking in the attic. And there's nothing in the books to support that he had contact with Seneca Crane or that Crane was part of the rebel movement. I've seen theories that Seneca Crane was an undercover rebel. I don't buy it. I feel like if he was, it would have been mentioned in the books. Seneca was a relative to Snow's old classmate Arachne Crane, who he watched bleed out after she was taunting her tribute with food and they attacked her. Based on what we know about Arachne and her family from Ballad, it seems super unlikely that Seneca was a rebel. Anyways, Haymitch did have a relationship with undercover rebel game maker Plutarch. It's super possible that a lot of the credit for what went down in the 74th games might be owed to Plutarch, but he was smart enough to pin it on Seneca. Plutarch was one of the game makers. He fell in the punch bowl when Katniss shot an arrow at them during her training session. I'm about to go into some Sunrise spoilers, so skip ahead to the labeled spoiler-free zone. I feel more confident about this based on what we learned about Plutarch in Sunrise. He had been on the lookout for a face of the rebellion for a long time. Someone just like Haymitch, but luckier, and who came at the right time with an army at their back. District 13. I imagine that Plutarch believed it was totally possible that the two-victor bait-and-switch play would result in disaster. He wouldn't be so arrogant about it like Seneca and Snow. Plutarch would think that the right tribute would openly defy the Capitol in a huge way that couldn't be ignored. Paint their poster. He talked a lot about implicit submission, encouraging Haymitch to challenge his. He said, "The games are the best propaganda we have. You tributes, you're our stars. You carry it out. But only if we control the narrative. Don't let us." I got chills when I first read that. In the 74th games, Plutarch saw Katniss's potential. Shooting at the game makers, volunteering for Prim. She had that spark of rebellion he was keeping an eye out for. Then the stars really aligned when Peeta dropped the love bomb. Since there was so much buzz about the star-crossed lovers, Plutarch could have started scheming for the two-victor play, and he's crafty enough to make Seneca think it was all his idea, convincing him that it would be his big moment, making history in the games. Haymitch could have told Plutarch about the intensity of Peeta's feelings for Katniss, and then they watched him fully fall in love with her in that cave. If he survived to the end, Snow and Seneca would have felt confident Peeta would sacrifice himself for her in an epic finale. Though they also may have believed Katniss would flip on him and shoot him outright. She nearly did shoot him when they revoked the rule, but more as a self-defense reflex. She thought he was grabbing his knife to attack her, but Peeta was just throwing it into the lake, purposely making himself defenseless. But I believe Plutarch, and maybe Haymitch, held out the hope that Katniss's rebellious streak would come out and that she would not implicitly submit. We're in the spoiler-free zone now. Then at the end, once it was clear what Katniss and Peeta were about to do with those berries, and Seneca had a few seconds to figure out what to do, Plutarch could have nudged him towards letting them both live, or Plutarch could have said nothing at the time since they would inspire the rebellion regardless of if they lived or died. If they died from the berries or dying from Seneca blowing them up, they'd still be martyrs that could be used for the rebellion. Plus, by staying quiet in this moment, Plutarch would be more safe from getting any blame about what happened. It'd be all on Seneca. Based on what Snow said in Catching Fire, he was not with Seneca when this happened, and there wasn't enough time to call him and give him orders to blow them up. Though, I think no matter what Seneca did, Snow still would have executed him for being the leader of this defiant disaster. Let's talk about how Haymitch, Cinna, and Portia pushed Katniss and Peeta to be a pair from the beginning. Before Peeta and Katniss met their stylist, Haymitch told them to go along with whatever they said. You're not gonna like what they do to you, but no matter what it is, don't resist. This was after he agreed to stay sober enough to help them as long as they do exactly what he says. It's unknown if Haymitch had a relationship with Cinna and Portia before the 74th games, but it's possible they did, since we know later that they were all part of the rebel movement. I imagine Haymitch always told his tributes to go along with what the stylist wanted, since it made things a lot easier. The stylists generally want to make the tributes look good to the Capitol crowd, because it also makes them look good professionally. It's Cinna's and Portia's first time as stylists, and they work as a team, and he asked to work with District 12. Since Cinna was part of the underground rebel movement in the Capitol, it makes sense why he would want to be paired with a district that has a rebel mentor. Haymitch. Right before Katniss and Peeta were about to take off in their chariot in their fiery outfits, Cinna told them to hold hands. This was major. Haymitch even said after that it was just the perfect touch of rebellion. By presenting Katniss and Peeta as a united front, it helps them stand out to sponsors and is a covert way to rebel. At this point in time in Panem, it's normalized for all the tributes to keep a distance from each other, except for the careers. District partners don't naturally form alliances like how we saw with Lucy Gray and Jessup in the 10th games. games. Katniss notes the way the other tributes acted in the parade, standing stiffly apart, never touching or acknowledging each other, as if their fellow tribute did not exist, as if the games had already begun. Presenting ourselves not as adversaries, but as friends has distinguished us as much as the fiery costumes. Cinna suggesting that they hold hands significantly helped out Peeta. It expanded the spotlight off of Katniss, which she got from volunteering. Now, both of the tributes from 12 were something to talk about. That evening, after the chariot ride, Haymitch sent Katniss and Peeta to bed while the grown-ups talk. Meaning him, Effie, Portia, and Cinna. I imagine this is where they strategized how to get the most out of this popularity boost. The next morning is when Haymitch told Katniss and Peeta to stick together. In public, I want you by each other's side every minute. You will appear amiable to each other. Haymitch demanded this. The only times they would be seen in public together would be during training, so the people who'd see them would be the game makers and the other tributes. Their stylists also decided to continue dressing them in matching outfits for training, and that was not normal. None of the other tributes were dressed alike. I know in the movie they're all wearing the same uniforms. It's just one of the many differences from the book. At this point in the story, my understanding is that Peeta had not told Haymitch he planned to sacrifice himself for Katniss yet, but I think Haymitch and the stylist could see that he cared about Katniss and were trying to get them to form an alliance in the games. Peeta would have gladly allied with Katniss, but she didn't give the impression of being open to that. She didn't trust him. So if Haymitch forced them to spend time together, acting like friends, it would increase the odds of them forming a real bond, so they would decide to be allies. Makes sense to me. I think Haymitch generally encouraged his tributes to work together, but it seemed to have fallen out of fashion. So outright telling them to be allies just didn't work anymore. The tributes needed to build trust and want to join forces. For Haymitch, having both of his tributes together likely increased their odds of survival since they could watch out for each other, and he's able to share their sponsor gifts better. He still have to basically pick one tribute to really help win, but starting with them together would help them live longer. Having Katniss and Peeta wear matching outfits in training is more of a play for the game makers' attention, so Katniss and Peeta could get some sort of duo storyline. Since an outlying district working together as a duo is unusual, it makes them interesting to the crowd, which makes it more likely the game makers would give them more screen time, which makes them more likely to get sponsors, and thus helping them stay alive. Remember, boring characters are eliminated from reality competition shows, and the big stars make it to the end. Pairing Katniss and Peeta together makes plenty of strategic sense, even if there isn't a two-victor plot. One last thing about Cinna, he at some point had a private conversation with Peeta on the rooftop. We know this because Peeta wanted to talk to Katniss privately to get the story on how she knew the redheaded Avox girl. She recognized her at dinner and then Peeta covered for her and it was a whole thing. Peeta wanted to know what was going on. So he said, "Have you been on the roof yet?" Cinna showed me. The wind's a bit loud though. Katniss registered the wind comment to mean that no one will overhear them talking. So what did Peeta and Cinna talk about on the rooftop where they purposely couldn't be overheard? My theory is that between the chariot ride and dinner, Cinna brought Peeta up there claiming to want to show him the view. Katniss was still busy showering and all that. Cinna brought him to the roof and got him talking about his life in 12 and Katniss. I bet Cinna could tell that Peeta had a crush on her, probably all the adults did. As a rebel, I imagine Cinna wanted to make the most out of his opportunity to interact with a district kid, so I imagine the conversation was a mix of genuine interest about the mindset of a kid from 12 and trying to get useful information for the rebel movement. And Cinna just being nice and treating Peeta like a person worthy of engaging with. If Cinna was on the lookout for potential tributes to kickstart the revolution, it would especially make sense why he wanted to talk to Peeta in private. What do you think Cinna talked to Peeta about? Let me know in the comments. All right, now onto the way the movies handled the two-victor rule change, which was a humongous flop, in my opinion. It's sloppy writing and doesn't make sense in terms of the politics of Panem. Let me explain. In the movie, right after Rue dies, the people in District 11 who are watching it in the town square started fighting the peacekeepers, and there's a huge riot that goes on into the night. Extra peacekeepers are flown in to stop it. It's a big deal. Seneca was freaking out about this since his games were responsible for this happening. And then Haymitch is talking to Seneca in this public hallway somewhere, and he says, "Don't kill her, you'll just create a martyr." It's already weird that Haymitch is able to talk to Seneca like this, like approach him. Seneca responds, "Well, it seems like we already got one." And Haymitch says, "I hear these rumors out of District 11. This could get away from you." It's pretty suspect that Haymitch would know about this because the Capitol is so secretive about everything, but I guess Plutarch or some other rebel people he's in contact with could have told him about it. But then, if Haymitch isn't supposed to know this private government information, he wouldn't be bringing it up to Seneca anyway. What is the rationale for Haymitch knowing about this in the movie? Maybe District 11 mentors got word from family back home over the phone and spread the rumor that way, I guess. Seneca asks Haymitch what he wants, and then he responds, "You have a lot of anger out there. I know you know how to handle a mob, job. You've done it before. If you can't scare them, give them something to root for. Young love. So the two victor thing is all Haymitch's idea in the movie? Question mark? Somehow, the mentor from the least respected district, who is viewed as a big drunken loser, is able to get the head game maker, who's basically the second most powerful guy in Pan Am after Snow, to make a never been done before, unprecedented rule change to the friggin' Hunger Games. Stupid! That makes no sense! The next scene is Seneca talking to Snow in his rose garden, and Seneca's trying to pitch this idea to Snow, saying how everyone likes an underdog, and Snow isn't having it. He says how the poorer districts, 10, 11, and 12, are full of underdogs, and says if Seneca could see them, he wouldn't be rooting for them. But then Snow goes, I like you, be careful. And that's it. Snow agreed to make the rule change, apparently. What about that conversation sounded like Snow was agreeing to anything? The announcement of the change is worded differently in the movie. It makes it a lot clearer that it's a temporary rule. Attention tributes, the regulations requiring a single victor have been suspended. From now on, two victors may be crowned if both originate from the same district. Keyword, suspended, not changed. Seems pretty obvious it's a temporary thing, and we don't know if Haymitch pitched it to Seneca as temporary or not, or what he pitched at all. But honestly, it would make the most sense if Haymitch did pitch it as a twist in the end, like versus Haymitch somehow convincing the Capitol to let two tributes win. Or maybe Haymitch didn't pitch anything specific, just wanting Seneca to set something up so Peeta and Katniss would be hanging out together and be romantic. It's so unclear. And when they made that announcement, Katniss was still sitting where she had been like crying and freaking out after Rue died, the same exact spot. She's no longer crying when the announcement is happening, but it looks like it's still the same day and it's still daylight. So very little time has passed, which wouldn't make sense in the timeline they just showed us of the riot going on until nighttime and then the two scenes with Seneca. I guess you could say it's the next day and Katniss just stayed sitting in that exact same spot, but it's super weak continuity-wise. Lame. Then Katniss reacted by whispering Peeta's name, and then she goes looking for him. In the movie, here's how the two victor rule is revoked. The announcer comes on saying, attention tributes, there has been a slight rule change. The previous revision, allowing for two victors from the same district, has been revoked. Only one victor may be crowned. Good luck, and may the odds be ever in your favor. It's pretty similar to the book, which was greetings to the final contestants of the 74th Hunger Games. The earlier revision has been revoked. Closer examination of the rule book has disclosed that only one winner may be allowed. Good luck, and may the odds be ever in your favor. So the movie version, it's a more blatant game maker plot twist. Versus in the book, the game makers are blaming this on a supposed Hunger Games rule book. They're just like, oops, sorry, we didn't realize this rule change was illegal. Never mind. And the Capitol citizens would accept this as a genuine fact, just like how they believe all the Quarter Quell themes were set in stone from the inception of the Hunger Games, which isn't true. No Quarter Quells existed. It makes sense from a propaganda perspective to word it this way, to blame the law. I know I'm being pretty harsh on the movie, but what do you think about the way the movies portrayed this versus the book? Do you have another theory on how the rule change came to be? Let me know in the comments. If you stuck through this whole video, thank you so much. When I sat down to write it, I had no clue it would be this long. Anyway, thank you.